Imagine buying a massive empty building, filling it up with stores, and then just kicking your feet up to watch the rent checks roll in every single month. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into what sounds like the ultimate passive income dream. I mean, hundreds of shoppers walking past your stores and every single tenant paying you just for the privilege of standing there. But, as you're going to see, it is absolutely not that simple. Actually, the story of how malls truly make their money and how they ultimately die is hands down one of the strangest and most deceptive stories in all of real estate.
So, here is the real question we need to figure out today. How exactly does a massive 98% occupied shopping mall turn into a literal pile of rubble in just a few short years? It honestly seems impossible, right? These are absolute monoliths of concrete and steel, anchored by some of the biggest brands in the world. Yet, they can completely collapse in the blink of an eye.
Section 1. The Illusion of Mall Ownership. You see, the very first thing nobody tells you when you picture owning a mall is that you aren't just buying a building. You're actually placing a massive, highly leveraged financial bet on the surrounding neighborhood. Just think about this number for a second. $2.75 million. Now, you probably think of malls as billion-dollar luxury properties, right? And sure, those super high-end, Class A malls in wealthy suburbs definitely are. But the gap between those and everything else is just staggering. Take Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio, for example. It was once valued at over $33 million, but it completely plummeted and sold for just $2.75 million in the early 2000s. Guys, that is barely a fraction of what it costs to just pour the concrete.
But let's be real, most everyday people don't buy entire shopping malls. Instead, they buy into a REIT, which stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. Basically, this allows ordinary investors like you and me to buy shares on the stock market for the price of a cup of coffee. You get a little piece of the profit without ever having to personally drive out in a snowstorm to fix a leaking roof or deal with a collapsed anchor tenant. It spreads the risk across dozens of properties, which is a totally different game than putting all your chips on one single building in one single town.
Section 2. 4 layers of mall revenue.
Okay, so how does a mall actually make its money? It's not just collecting one giant rent check every month. It's actually this really strange, multi-layered system. First up, you've got base rent. That's the fixed monthly amount a store pays for its space. Second is percentage rent, where the mall literally takes a cut of a store's sales if they perform really well, so it scales automatically. Third is common area maintenance, or CAM, where tenants pay their fair share to clean the floors, run the security, and keep those escalators moving. And finally, non-store revenue. Think of things like parking fees, digital advertising screens, and those little pop-up photo booths.
But here is where the math gets totally wild. On one hand, you have massive anchor stores like Sears. Before their bankruptcy, they were paying around $5 per square foot in base rent. On the other hand, you have tiny specialty clothing stores right next door paying $50 to $60 a square foot. It's crazy. The store with the biggest sign and the most floor space was paying roughly 1/10 of what the little shop next door was paying.
So the absolutely crucial point to understand is this. In the mall business, position is worth way more than space. Think about a kiosk for a second. A tiny 100 square foot cart selling sunglasses in the middle of a busy walkway pays a massive premium. Why? Well, because it sits exactly in the path of every single shopper passing through. Per square foot, that tiny little cart is one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the entire building.
Section 3. The Anchor Tenant Trap. To really wrap our heads around why those giant anchor stores get such a comical discount on their rent, it all comes down to a simple idea. The mall owner isn't renting square footage, they are renting foot traffic. You see, the anchor store is what actually draws the crowds in the first place. So the mall owner pays for that crowd by giving the anchor a massive rent discount. And who makes up the difference? All the smaller specialty stores. The little shops paying full price are essentially subsidizing the giant anchors just for the privilege of being near the foot traffic that the anchor brings in.
And to force you to walk past all those smaller, full-price stores, developers literally weaponized architecture. The tricks pioneered by Alfred Taubman, who's basically the father of the modern American mall, are frankly astonishing. He spaced those big anchor stores exactly 3 city blocks apart. He intentionally put the escalators at the far ends of the hallways, never in the middle. And he makes skylights with artificial lights so you'd completely lose track of time. The entire commercial logic of a mall is to force movement and maximize your exposure to the smaller stores that are actually paying the bills.
Section 4. The Co-tenancy Domino Effect.
But there is a fatal flaw in this brilliant design.
It's a hidden legal trapdoor known as a co-tenancy clause. This is a contract term buried in almost every single mall lease. It basically states that if a major anchor store closes, the smaller stores around it are suddenly legally allowed to pay reduced rent, or in some cases, just walk away from their lease entirely. So the day an anchor leaves, you don't just lose one rent check. No, you instantly trigger a massive wave of rent reductions affecting dozens of stores.
And this brings us to a really staggering number: 80%. To understand just how devastating this trapdoor is, look back at the 2018 Sears bankruptcy. Sears was a massive anchor. When they went under, roughly 80% of their branded stores were located inside regional malls. They were the load-bearing pillars of the entire industry. When they fell, they pulled the financial floor out from under thousands of smaller stores at exactly the same time.
And the crazy thing is, you can't just quickly replace them. Subdividing an empty anchor box can easily cost $100 million and take over 3 years. These buildings were built for one very specific kind of tenant: enormous 100,000 square foot floor plates with their own loading docks. Converting that massive cavern into 4 smaller, usable stores requires an astronomical amount of money and time that a bleeding mall simply doesn't have.
Section 5. The Fall of Rolling Acres. We can actually watch this terrifying financial domino effect play out in real time. Remember Rolling Acres? It opened in 1975. By the mid-90s, it was an absolute powerhouse. We're talking 140 stores, 5 anchors, sitting at 98% occupied. But then a newer mall opened nearby, and anchors started leaving. By 2008, the interior was dead. By 2013, the very last store closed its doors. Just a few years later, in 2016, demolition began. From a bustling community hub to a literal pile of rubble in just a couple of decades.
The engine behind that incredibly rapid decay is something called the CAM death spiral. First, an anchor leaves, and those co-tenancy clauses trigger. Second, vacancy rises as some stores just decide to walk away. But here is the absolute killer in step 3, the fixed common area maintenance costs, like heating, lighting those massive hallways, and paying for security. They don't shrink just because a store is empty. Those huge fixed costs get split among fewer paying tenants. So, finally, the remaining loyal tenants suddenly see their monthly bills skyrocket, forcing them to flee too. The empty hallways literally price the surviving stores out of business.
And honestly, there is a bitter irony to the Rolling Acre story. Today, the land where that massive mall stood is an Amazon distribution center. Think about that. Online shopping, the very thing that killed the mall's monopoly on convenience, the thing that allowed you to shop from your couch without fighting for a parking spot, literally paved over its grave.
Section 6. How surviving malls adapted.
But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. Smart mall owners saw the retail apocalypse coming and started fighting back with totally new kinds of anchor tenants. To survive, malls had to replace traditional department stores with things a computer screen genuinely cannot replace. You can't get an X-ray through your smartphone, right? So medical clinics moved in. You can't bench press online, so in came the mega gyms, co-working spaces, entertainment venues, even luxury apartments. They replaced vulnerable retail with internet-proof services that physically force people to leave their houses.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Malls used to sell products. Surviving malls sell experiences. The buildings that are thriving today didn't just tweak their storefronts, they fundamentally transformed their identity. They evolved from massive retail hubs into interconnected mixed-use communities, where people don't just shop, but they live, work, and play.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative question. Think about the shopping center in your town right now. Is your local mall a growing, vibrant community hub selling experiences? Or is it a financial house of cards quietly dependent on a single anchor store, just waiting for one piece to fall and trigger the death spiral? Next time you walk past an empty department store, you'll know exactly what's happening beneath the surface. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking questions.